what's my purpose? Like, what do I want
Mhm.
to do? I mean, even within the last several years, I remember being at masterminds and seeing these women. So I'm 36 now. And so I've at these masterminds with women who are maybe in their 50s that are like, this is my purpose. And I was like, what is that? I don't know what that feels like. Is this my
Yeah.
purpose? I don't know. It's been 11 years since I started the company. And I feel like really in the past year, there's been these moments of clients reflecting back on me, like how podcast guesting has changed their lives. And I'm like, I think this is why I'm here.
Hello, amazing humans, and welcome to episode number 275 of the Game On Girlfriend podcast. Now, if you've thought about being a podcast guest, this is going to be an episode you're going to want to grab a journal and maybe like a little pen and like get to work because my guest, Jessica Rhodes, is going to be sharing some really great nuggets on how to be an incredible podcast guest, which honestly I think is more important than people realize. Sure, you want to be on podcasts because, oh my gosh, what a great way to be introduced to someone else's audience. What a great way to share your story. What a great way for people to know about your business, what you do, what problem you solve, all those wonderful things. However, there are some ways to really blow that, like to really not do a great job when you're a guest on someone else's podcast. And I was excited to talk to Jessica about this today. One, because as a podcast host, I will tell you, I have experienced some of these things where it's very clear to me, maybe the guest has no idea who I am or what the Game On Girlfriend podcast is about or how awesome all of you who have subscribed and love and rated this podcast, like they have no idea who you are. And that's really awful for me. So I wanted to talk to Jessica about how we can help as many people as possible be fantastic guests so that you can grow your business, show up, and be confident when you do. Jessica Rhodes founded Interview Connections, the world's first and leading podcast booking agency way back in 2013, back when no other agencies even existed. Since its founding, Interview Connections has booked over 30,000 podcast interviews for over 800 clients. I mean, shut the front door. That's amazing. She loves helping entrepreneurs who feel like the world's best kept secret. She likes helping them grow their business online through genuine human to human connection. The podcast interviews Jessica and her team have booked have helped her clients generate millions of dollars in sales, help them sell thousands of books, and transform countless lives. You know it's true. There's been a podcast episode you listened to and you fell in love with an author and bought a book. There's been a podcast episode you listened to and you signed up for somebody's free download so that you could learn more about them, or you loved what they were talking about and you couldn't wait to get your hands on it. Podcasting is so special. It is so unique. And in the world of algorithms and chat GPTing everything, it is a beautiful addition to any marketing plan to help you connect with the right people for your business as a human being, not as a robot. Pop in those earphones. Let's get to it. Jessica, welcome to the Game On Girlfriend podcast. As the podcast expert you are, I'm like borderline nervous and super excited to have you here.
Well, you're a pro, so consider us both healthfully nervous. Just kidding.
I love it. I love it. All the truth of it all, right? Like we're so
Yeah.
honest. Like, Mono, here we go. Okay. But so I loved learning about you, all of the amazing things that you do for people. And clearly, you're super smart. You have this amazing energy about you and the way that you work with podcast guesting. But I have to ask you, because we have so many people listening who are trying to figure out why they're here. What do they do? Who are they? Right. So for you, out of all the things you could have done on planet Earth right now, why is this what you've chosen to do with your life?
I can't say I ever really chose, like, I didn't wake up thinking, like, I am going to start a podcast booking agency. It wasn't like a business idea that I had, but it all starts. And I know that balancing motherhood and work is, one of your speaking topics. That is really how this all came to be when I was pregnant with my first child, who's 11 and a half years old now.
Wow.
When I was pregnant with him, I knew I wanted to be home. I was working at a nonprofit organization full time, bringing in like $35,000 a year. And so I thought, okay, I can't keep working 12-hour days at this salary. I
Yeah.
want to be home. And my dad is an entrepreneur. He's had his own coaching company and newsletter marketing business since I was a teenager. And
Oh,
so
wow.
when I told him I wanted to be home, he told me about the world of being a virtual assistant. And he said that I'll be your first client. And I was like, okay. And so it's been this series of just one decision at a time that has led me to where I am now. So my dad was my first client, started doing work in his business. he asked me if I would book him on podcasts because that,
Mm,
and again, this is 2013. It was a great way for him to be getting coaching clients and building, visibility without traveling. He was kind of tired of going to the seminars and the trade shows and the conferences all the time. And he had started podcasting and podcast guesting as a way to increase his visibility without travel. And so
yeah.
my
Oh,
background is in door to door. That was what I did at the nonprofit. I managed a door to door canvas, so I've got
oh my
really thick
God.
skin. And so he's like, "Yeah, you could apply that to booking interviews." So I started booking podcast interviews, and as I was emailing these podcast hosts, they're like, "Wait a second, nobody's ever pitched me before," which I'm sure you can imagine is like, what is that world? Because now you get pitched like
Wow.
5 times a day.
100.
And so
Yes.
yeah, exactly, and so back then, nobody was pitching podcast hosts, and so then people were like, "Wait, who are you? What do you do?" And I'm like, "I don't know, I'm a virtual assistant, I work with my dad." And as my son was, like, 6 months old, he's, napping less, I'm like, "I really want to find a way to make more money without just billing more hours," because at that
Mm,
time, I'm just this 1099 freelance virtual assistant,
yeah.
not making a ton of money. And it was really my dad who helped me come up with the idea. I was doing a few different things as a VA, and he says, "Well, out of all the things that you're doing for me and for some other clients, like, what do you like the best? What's in most demand? What do you enjoy? What has the biggest growth potential?" And all signs pointed to booking podcast interviews. So it was actually my parents were visiting me. We were taking the baby for a walk and we pulled up GoDaddy and we came up with this idea of interviewconnections.com. He's like, it's kind of got to describe what you do. It's got to be descriptive, but kind of catchy, roll off your tongue. And so we got the domain and he helped me put together the packages and the pricing. And that was really how I got started, and I mean, it was just my dad, one of his business advice is always follow the money, and not
Mm,
like in a slimy way, but just like, where's
yeah.
the demand, because a lot of people start a business because 'cause they're like, "This is what I wanna do," but nobody wants it, or it's not the right time, and there's not the demand for it, and
Mhm.
so he always taught me to really, like, follow the money, like, really listen to the market. Look,
Yes.
what do people need? What do they want? What are they willing to pay for it? And so that's really how things got started, and following the money, responding to what the market is wanting and saying is how we've grown Interview Connections to where we are now, which I say we because now I have a business partner. I brought on a 50% co-owner who's our CEO in 2018. And so we've continued to grow and innovate to where we are today.
That is so exciting. That is so exciting. I really appreciate what you said about step by step by step because I think there's so many people out there, maybe they hate their corporate job or like the same thing you went through of like, "Oh dear, I am not going back for like 12 hours a day for that." So it's not happening, right? That those
Mhm.
moments we have. But
Yeah.
then there's like this deer in the headlights fear of like, "Well, I don't know what my passion is or I don't know what do I," right? And there's some people who were born with their like they knew they needed to be a painter or a Taylor Swift in her songwriting, right? Like some people just came
Yeah.
out going, "This is what I'm doing." But
Yeah.
that's rare. And so I appreciate your honesty and saying, "Look, I tried some things on." And like what both luck and genius that you had an entrepreneur in the family who, by the way, was all about marketing, who
Yeah.
could really be like, "No, this is a viable thing you can actually do." Because I think so many people get scared to even start because they're not sure what to like you were saying, like, we just went to GoDaddy and got the website and
Yeah.
understanding those are the steps that launch a business.
Yeah, and I really relate to that feeling that you emphasize, like, people are like, "What's my purpose? Like, what do I
Mhm.
wanna do?" I mean, even within the last several years, I remember being at masterminds and seeing these women. So I'm 36 now, and so I've at these masterminds with women who are maybe in their 50s that are like, "This is my purpose," and I was like, "What is that I don't know what that feels like. Is this my
Yeah,
purpose? I don't know."
yeah.
And it's been 11 years since I started the company, and I feel like really in the past year, there's been these moments of clients reflecting back on me, like, how podcast guesting has changed their lives, and I'm like, "I think this is why I'm here. I think this is why I'm here." Like, I feel like the universe is just continuing to send me those messages that it's like, "This is why you're here," but sometimes it takes over a decade to get those messages, and you just need to
Mhm.
keep going because like you said, not everyone is born like, "This is my purpose in life." I mean, I wanted to be an actress when I was a kid. I did theater. Like, I didn't grow up thinking like I'm going to be an entrepreneur, but it was just like one thing led to another. I studied communications in college. Like, I took a PR class. Like, there were
Interesting.
things when I look back where I'm like, "Oh wow, like this does connect to what I'm doing now." but I couldn't have seen it at that time.
Yes, I really love that you're sharing this. I think it's so important. I know there are people listening going, "That's me," right? And it's so interesting. Isn't it fun to kind of look back and go, "Oh my god, that's why I studied that," or "That's why was I interested in that? I don't even know." Right? And I mean, I think about that just to share on my side too. I was an English major and everyone was like, "Why?" And I said, "Because I want to be able to take complex things and explain them so anyone can understand them." And I have to tell you, I use that skill every freaking day. And it's so, but
Yeah.
like, who knew when we were doing it then? And I think the honesty of that and the realness of the truth that sometimes it's just one step at a time. I just want to alleviate the pressure from anyone listening who's like, you don't, you don't. You just have to trust your
Yeah.
instincts. Yeah.
I think it's the one of the hardest parts about being a leader and an innovator is that
Mm,
you are blazing the trail, which means you can't like nobody else had a podcast booking agency. The number of iterations we went through with packages, pricing, how we talk about what we do, what do we call our workshops, how do we explain it? Do we make it more general, call it visibility because people don't know what podcast guessing is? Like there were all of these things because there was nobody ahead of me that had done this. And
mm.
it makes it so difficult. It sometimes you're like, confused and not knowing where you're going, but then behind you, all these people are like, "Thank you, like, you're leading the way." And so it's just this duality of sometimes not really knowing where you're going or how to get there, but then looking back and realizing there's all these people that are so grateful that you blazed that trail because you're making it more clear for them.
Oh, so good, Jessica. That's so good. And it's funny, just in the Abundance Academy, there was a conversation in the group Voxer just today about this feeling that sometimes when we look out on the interwebs or social media, we feel like there's people doing what we're doing and we compare ourselves and it just sucks. And I was like, no, you know what? Go and try to differentiate yourself. Try to do something different. Break the industry. Talk about the problems you solve. And if you see someone talking about it this way, talk about why you are opposite of that or finding those moments. And I feel like you did that for like booking. It was like, there's
Mhm.
not this thing here. And I really appreciate that. Like sometimes when you're doing this and it is step by step, you don't fully know the impact until years later.
Yeah, it takes a
Yeah.
lot of patience to wait until because there is no instant validation, there's no instant gratification. You get these little wins along the way, but sometimes it takes over a decade sometimes to look back and be like, "Oh,
I did a thing.
wow, I did a lot."
I did a thing here. Look at me. Look what I did. That's really
Exactly.
great. No, I really
Yeah.
appreciate that. Yeah. So as we're going through this, right? I know there are people listening who are like, how do you even get started in guesting? Aren't there so many podcast hosts that are like, don't call me? How do we actually do this? And I know you really talk about like the three pillars of being a successful guest for someone else, right? We love the visibility of
Mhm.
podcasts. But oh my heavens, please don't show up and go, well, this one time I was making toast. And it's like, no, oh my God, right? So what do you consider the three
Yes.
pillars of being a great guest?
Yeah, so it's so important to look at the big picture of podcast guesting because there are so many different ways to make it successful for both you and the host. And the first most important pillar is your relationship with the host. So many
Mm,
people go on podcasts and they leverage podcast guesting as this ticket to somebody else's audience, but they have no focus on who the host of the show is. And
mhm,
podcast guesting and having a podcast and interviewing guests is all about the relationship. It's networking, it's collaboration, it's having a connection with another human being who's in your line of work, who's in your
mm,
industry, who has your target market. So number 1, focus on your relationship with the host. I mean, see the value in the interview even if nobody listens to it. Even if nobody downloads the show, recognize how valuable the opportunity was to be answering questions, sharing story, having someone
mm,
reflect back on you, how powerful what you're saying is. So, host relationships is huge. Get connected with the host on social media, LinkedIn before the show, read their bio, learn about their business. Like, really put your focus there and feel the gratitude for that opportunity. I don't think
mhm,
entrepreneurs really understand or know the amount of resources, time, and money that goes into having a podcast. And so when you really let that sink in, you feel so much gratitude for the opportunity, and when that energy and that vibration is right, that's where the abundance comes, right? Like, that's where the opportunities arise, whether there's 50 people listening or there's 1,000 people listening. So that's the first pillar is really focus on
mm.
your relationship with the host of the show.
I love that
Yeah.
because I have to tell you, there are times I know no people come on and they have no idea who I am, or they didn't read the thousands of times I said, "Hey, this is going to be a video podcast." They're like, "Is this video?" I'm
Right.
like, "Oh my goodness!" Right? It's like it's just
Yeah.
take. It doesn't take long either, right? Like 3 to 5 minutes to really dive in. I think that's such great advice, Jessica. I love that. Okay, so pillar
Yeah.
one, love up on the host, people.
Yes, love
Love
up
it.
on the hose. So, number two, one thing we always talk about is repurposing the content, really leveraging the content in that show. And so that goes into actually kind of the meat and potatoes of the podcast interview. Like, what stories are you talking about? What are you sharing? What anecdotes are you giving? What are you saying about your story? Because that's going to make a really good interview. And you did such a great job as a host, like prepping me, like, this is what I'm going to share. Like, here's how to make the most of it. And
Mhm.
so, really focusing on giving a great interview, sharing stories, being compelling, having great video, but also great audio, because some people will
Yeah.
listen to the audio or only version. Some people will watch the clip on social media. Some people will sit on YouTube and watch it. So, doing a really great job as a guest, having great sound quality, having a microphone, using it correctly, having really good lighting, like doing all the things so you show up and look like an A player is going to be huge. And then giving a call to action so that you're able to invite people to connect with you directly if they want to stay in touch with you. That's huge.
Love it. I love it. Yes, and I couldn't
Yeah.
agree more. It's really hard. Like there's so much that does go into, and I once again want to say I really appreciate you saying that because I think there is this maybe misconception that a podcast is just a thing that some of us do as a hobby, right? Like
Yeah.
no, it's a big line item on our budget every month, right?
Right.
Like we put a lot of care into who we talk to. We do a lot of care into the cuts that we end up using or putting shorts on YouTube, those sorts of things.
Mhm.
And I think that can be overlooked. People just show up and go, "Okay, but I wanna tell my story so I can get your audience." And you're like, "That's nice." Like, we've worked really
Yeah.
hard for this audience. We love them, and we
Yeah.
really, really take great care in who we bring and who we share. I love that you're saying that because I do think because so many people have podcasts, people have gotten a little flippant about it. And it's like, no, it's
Yeah.
quite an undertaking and it's a beautiful undertaking. It's one of my favorite parts of my job. But
Yeah.
it's an undertaking. It's a real thing.
It wasn't
Yeah.
that long ago people got four-year degrees in order to have an interview show, and so,
I
it
mean,
really does take something, and so
yeah.
yeah, when I do podcast interviews, I'm talking about podcast interviews, so it's all very meta, so I'll kind of pull back the curtain just as a way to kind of bring people, through the fourth wall here, but, do a little bit of research before the interview, like, I read your bio, I watched your speaker reel, I listened to one of your podcast interviews, so that, even saying like, "Oh, I know one of your topics is, balancing work and motherhood," when listeners can feel that you and the host know each other and they're not witnessing a first date, because it's like that can be a little bit cringy when you're like,
Ah,
"Oh my God, they're on a first date over there and it is not going well." But when there's already some rapport with the guests and it makes it more enjoyable. Like the interview that I listened to is you and your client. So it
mm,
was like the chemistry was amazing. You guys already knew each other. We're meeting for the first time. So I better make sure I come prepared. So I'm not just this like nobody rolling in off the street going like, cool, like what should we talk about? So take that time to research the host, come prepared so that you can start things off on the right foot.
oh, so good, so good. For those of you who are like, "I wanna get on podcast," listen to that. Jessica's amazing. Listen to the words falling out of her face. So good. So good. All right. So pillar number 1, know the host. Pillar number 2, come prepared.
Yes, yes. And so,
Okay.
yeah, we're kind of blending the pillars together, but yeah, come prepared, give great stories. And, that's going to give you the content to then repurpose because a lot of people are going to
Ah,
listen to the interview. But when you give a great interview, there's going to be 1,000 clips that can
mm,
be edited from the full episode that then can be leveraged on social media. And a
right.
lot of people, like short form video content is huge on social media. Like
Sure.
Gary Vaynerchuk did a video where he's like, "Yeah, I still guest on podcasts so that I have short form clips. Like I so that I can edit out clips from my podcast appearances to then use on social media."
Mhm.
And I've had clients that tell me they've gotten clients of people who just see a clip. They don't even listen to the
Yes.
full podcast, but they watch a 2-minute clip of them on a podcast and they're like, "Cool, you're for me." So when you give a great interview where the sound is good, the video is good, there's good rapport with the host, people could watch just the clip and be sold on you or then wanna listen to the whole thing.
Oh my god, that's so good. So good. I completely agree. And then I think also the other one I just wanna highlight as far as, like, being a great guest is also the call to action.
Yes.
As the business coach,
Yes.
I can't let that go. We've
Oh,
gotta,
for
like, invite people
sure.
in, right? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
so many people, they do podcast interviews and they're like, "Didn't really work for me. I didn't really see the ROI." And I say, "Well, what was your call to action?" And they're like, "I don't
What?
think I gave one." So where are you sending the listeners to? What offer are you giving? And not a paid offer, it's gotta be free, it's not a webinar, it's not a pitch, that you're giving, but if you give a great interview, people really liked hearing you for the first time, where can they get more? Something simple like a lead magnet, or it could be a
Mhm.
discovery call, like a lot of coaches and consultants just offering a discovery call or something like that can be really valuable. Offering, join my Facebook group community or, connect with me on LinkedIn, add a note, tell me you heard me on this podcast, and then just get a conversation going. But drive
Mhm.
the listeners to one place
Yeah.
where they can connect with you.
Love it. Love it. Yes. Cause you know what I will say, again, I'm going to be transparent over here too. Like every time I'm on a podcast, we'll watch when that airs and watch the newsletter list grow. And I love that so much because I hate running ads personally. It's just not my favorite thing. I'll do it when we need to, but I
Mhm.
don't love it because it doesn't feel as organic to me. It doesn't feel as connective. And my whole
Yeah.
thing is like we really love our clients. We love the people we work with and I want to know them. And so when someone gets introduced to our business because I was on a podcast and I watch those come in, I get so excited because I know those are our people. And I think that that is something so unique that podcast guesting gives us,
Yeah. Yeah,
that
I love
that
that.
people overlook. Mhm.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the ads too, because depending on like what type of business, it doesn't make sense to be running a ton of ads as a coach, you're doing one-on-one calls, you have these small, like really refined groups. Some like we run ads as an agency, we are working to, scale and get a lot of clients, but it's so different. People that come in through ads, they are cold.
Yes.
You got their attention for a few seconds. They liked what you had to say in the hook of your video, but then it takes a lot of legwork to nurture them and warm them up and stay in touch with them. When somebody hears you on a podcast, they are warm, they are qualified, they feel like they know you. There's so much trust there. They heard you having a conversation with a host that they already know, like, and trust. Like,
Yeah.
it's so much less legwork on the back end once they opt in versus like an ad lead who's very cold and just kind of you caught their attention, but they're not quite warmed up yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've noticed too sometimes even with ads, they're like, where did you come how do I know you?" And it's like, "Oh boy, let's warm this thing up." And that also leads me to something else I know that you're really a specialist in, which we're already starting to hear, and that is creating the warm leads, like really bringing people in that are warm and ready to work. Is it that podcasting is the best way to do that? Are there other ways to back that up that you think people should know about when they're podcast guesting?
Yeah, so generating warm qualified leads is all about show selection. What types of
Ooh.
podcasts are you getting interviewed on? And it
Mm,
like being really intentional with what types of podcasts you're guesting on is your key to then making sure you're set up for success to have the leads that take your call to action to be a to be a qualified lead. So, looking at who is like what are your goals for podcast guesting if assuming it's to generate warm qualified leads, who is your ideal client, like everything that you can know about them. Because some people just say, like, business owners, do they own a $500 million company or do they
right.
own a six-figure business? Like, what types of business owners, does it tend to be men, women, anyone, age, like industry? What are their pain points? So get as much detail as you
Mm,
can on who your target market is. Who is your ideal client? What are their pain points? What's keeping them up at night? What are you uniquely specialized to help people with? And this is my favorite thing is what is the information your target audience, your ideal client needs to understand to say, yes, you're the person for me? Because that is going to close the gap between somebody who's an ideal client, wanting to work with you. And that's what you're going to be interviewed on in your podcast. So, really understanding who your target market is, what types of shows are they listening to,
mm.
and then go get interviewed on those shows. Because a lot of people that just start podcast guesting organically, they're like, yeah, I can get interviewed. Like, I've got friends, they've got podcasts. They're like a good fit for me. But then when you get really intentional about it and you start strategically targeting the shows that have dream clients listening, it expands you and it opens you up to audiences that aren't just kind of in your Rolodex and in your immediate, circle of influence.
Yeah, or got caught up in an algorithm, right? Like that too, and
Right.
really it's one of the things I love speaking about the warmth of podcasts, I love that if someone subscribed to a podcast, they get that the podcast got released that day, like, they just get it, there's no
Yeah.
algorithm there, and I think that is so critical and also overlooked a lot for people in the depth of relationship that can be created over podcasting because there's nothing in the way. That
Yeah.
is
And
so cool.
And you also have to be consistent with podcasting. It doesn't you want to be on the right shows, giving a great interview, giving the right call to action, But this is a long-term strategy. It's a
Mhm.
slow burn for multiple reasons. Number one, it's going to take you time to refine your message. It is a skill and an art to give a great podcast interview. To whether you're a host or a guest, it takes time. Like I'm sure like on the first episode, maybe there were some kinks to work out, like how to really we all
Yep.
experience it regardless of like how much it's a different medium, speaking
Mhm.
into a microphone, engaging people through an audio only or video format. And so it takes time to kind of work out the kinks and get really good and know what stories, how do I talk about what I do in a way that people are going to listen and get it and want
Yeah.
to reach out. So that's part of the consistency, but it also just takes time for people to hear you. I mean, one of my clients told me that somebody heard him on a podcast and then set up a Google alert so that they would always get alerted every time he was on a podcast. And that person listened to his appearances for a couple years and then bought one of his high ticket programs.
Oh
So
my
some
god,
people,
that's so great.
right?
I
I'm
love
like,
that
wow,
story.
that's incredible. So
Yeah.
some people, that's another thing my dad taught me. He said buyers buy when they're ready to buy.
Mhm.
Somebody might hear you and they are not like maybe they just joined someone else's coaching program. So they're like,
Mhm.
"Man, I really like this person, but I just invested in something else." And so then
Yep.
they need to follow you for a little while. They want to keep listening and then they're going to be ready in a year from now. But if you did 4 interviews in 1 month thinking, "Oh, it didn't work." Then they lost you. They're not coming back. So stay visible, stay consistent. It'll keep you on people's algorithm, on people's feed. I took my one last thing and then I'll get
I
so
love it. Are you
I
kidding? Keep talking, sister.
okay. So I've been in business for 11 years. And so I've been pretty consistent almost my entire career on podcast guesting. But there was this moment of time, I call it our dark days, where things got a little off track with our marketing. We tried some different things and I got a little cocky. We had some of our highest years ever. And I'm like, I've done so many. I'm going to take a break. I got to focus on some other things. And so I probably went a year without being consistent with my guesting. And then when I got back into it, I had people like friends in business that were like, "Where'd you go?" And I was
Wow,
like,
so they did
"Oh my
notice.
God, they noticed." And so you think people don't notice you when you're visible, but try going away and coming back. They noticed. You
Wow.
and that was like that hit me because I'm like, "Oh my goodness. This is literally what I do. It's what I teach people." And so it really taught me the importance of walking my walk and talking my talk. And so ever since then, my team books me on 3 to 4 shows every single month. I lead by
Mhm.
example because if I am not leading by example, and I don't care, most of you probably don't do podcast booking as a business, but if you're you're a coach, you're a consultant, whatever you're doing, you need to be visible to lead your clients because they need to see you as a leader
Mm.
and being out there, being visible, teaching, being an authority. That is leadership and they will follow your lead. Leading by example is the most powerful form of leadership because it's really
Ugh.
easy to talk, but to actually walk your walk is a game changer.
Oh, I love it. You're saying it so much more elegantly than I say it. I say you gotta eat your own dog food. I think I like the way you're saying it better. But it's so true, right? Like, you can't be out there. I can't be a coach who's like, "Listen, running a business can be hard. Sometimes social media sucks," and then I disappear, right? We gotta stay in the game. I love that. That is so great. Okay, so
Yes.
we've talked a lot about the gooey goodness that is, podcasting, being visible. I love that you really tell people to be visible. I think it's so challenging for so many entrepreneurs I know, but the more you do it, right, the more naturally it starts to come. But as we look forward in the world of podcasting, what do you see coming for everyone in like the coming, let's say the coming year? What should we expect from podcasting? Is there anything
Yeah.
we should be changing or doing differently or looking out for?
So the things that you want to be looking out for is number one, and understand is that the podcast industry is continuing to grow. A
Mhm.
lot of people question, is the bubble going to burst? Is it too saturated? Am I too late? Every single year since 2013, the number of people that listen to podcasts has grown. More and more people are
Wow.
listening. It's over a decade of pure growth. Podcasts are being acquired, companies are being acquired,
Mhm.
big money is coming into podcasting. This medium is not going anywhere. So if you're still waiting, stop waiting. Get into it. With
Okay.
that, with the number of podcasts, there's over 3 million podcasts.
Wow.
Podcasts are becoming more targeted, more niche. When I first started, I would look
Mm.
around and there was like like 5 podcasts for women entrepreneurs. Now there's probably millions, but they all have their own little flair, their own little flavor, their own kind of little special niche, something that makes them unique. So they're more targeted. With that, audience sizes tend to be a little bit smaller because they're so concentrated.
Mhm.
A
Mhm.
really general wide show for all of women entrepreneurs can be really big because it can kind of capture everyone. Whereas now it's like we see, getting off the women entrepreneur, but like an HVAC business podcast, a podcast for plumbers. Like I'm
Wow.
telling you, some of our clients that go on HVAC podcasts have had the biggest ROI because they're small podcasts with the most
This
concentrated listeners.
this makes sense.
Everyone in that audience is exactly who they wanna be talking to. And so you're gonna see really targeted small audiences that drive big results because you're in front of the right people. You're not
Oh,
trying to get maybe 5 people in a 500-person audience to take action. You've got 500 people that are all the perfect fit for you. And then it's all about collaborating with the host. The people who start and lead interview-based podcast do it for the collaboration with the guest.
mm,
That is
mm,
almost always their focus, primarily, or one of the top priorities is to collaborate with guests. They're strategically bringing on either clients, potential referral partners, potential clients. Like it is a strategy where then they do JVs with them after the interview. They'll say, "Hey, do you want to come speak to my clients? Can I come speak
yes.
to your clients?" I'm doing a conference. I'd love for you to be one of the speakers. This is a networking strategy. So when you
Mm.
understand that, you can go into podcast interviews knowing what the game is that you're playing.
I love that, and it's so true. I will tell you, we have someone who's gonna be a guest speaker inside the Venice Academy who was a podcast guest, right? Like, there's so much possibility and opening by connecting with other people who even have the interest in a podcast, right? Like, even that
Yeah.
alone, like, you're already there because you're both working to be visible, like, you're both understanding the worth of that, and then working on it together. I think there's already so much common ground. I think that's really great. And I do think it's something that again, I feel like I'm saying this over and over in this episode, Jessica, but I feel like something we overlook.
Yeah.
Right? We're so excited to meet each other and I mean anyone I bring on the podcast. It's interesting when you said they want to collaborate. For me, it started with I wanted to share more stories
Mhm.
because I think like what you shared today was so valuable. There's so many people out there who are like I don't think I have a purpose. But I don't wanna
Yeah.
work at this job anymore, right? And so that, like, gives them permission to now go explore, and what I've been so excited so that was my motivation was sharing stories, and I'll tell you on the back end, I have met some of the coolest people that I get to text with, talk to almost weekly now because they are just amazing humans. So I think you're
Yeah.
absolutely right, and I can even forget that, so I appreciate you reminding me.
It's the best way to find new business besties, new people to collaborate with, and just see the big picture. What I say is like when you do 3 to 4 interviews every month, like not every host is gonna be I say not every host is a love connection. Not every show you're gonna walk away with a new best friend. But, if 1 out of every 10 podcast hosts that interviews you, you guys end up doing something amazing together, like that's incredible. So see the value in every interaction, every opportunity. My clients always say like not every interview is going to lead to a ton of leads and sales, but when you look at the big picture, it is a really important ingredient in the overall marketing plan.
100%, 100%. And I will say it's one of my most important for just my perspective in this business and in the way that we're working. I think especially because of trust, right? I feel like
Yes.
there's such a collapse of faith in online sales, in the service industry. Like there's just that moment. So when people can really connect with us and be with us, it's just so critical. And it should definitely, I believe, be part of anybody's marketing plan for sure. For sure.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of trust, there's one little thing that I always want to make sure we bring up with the podcast conversation because it's people don't recognize it enough is this is an amazing SEO strategy, search engine optimization. So good. Most of us are not, running like coaching and consulting businesses. We don't always have like an SEO team. So when you get backlinks to your website on other people's sites, like when other people put a link back to your website, Google sees that. And so you have a bigger footprint online. And I do think that ties into trust because when somebody Googles you and they see that you've been interviewed on a bunch of podcasts, people are posting about you, you've got a bunch of results that come up on YouTube of you on other people's podcasts, it does communicate trust because all these people can't be wrong. If all of these people are interviewing you,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
can't all be, so it does really help to be seen and heard on multiple different platforms other than your own. And it's really good for your SEO too. So and I just think that's so, so important, especially if you're just doing organic strategies,
Mhm.
keep that SEO in mind.
Yeah, it's huge, it's huge. I always say too, we always try to pick our podcast titles, the episode titles based on what someone would Google to find it. And that's another way, it's just
Yes.
so organic, right? It's like just
Yeah.
so organic, so natural for people to start to find. I really oh my God, I'm so excited. Okay. So Jessica, if someone's listening, I know you have this awesome free download for people who are listening. Can you tell us about it?
Yes, absolutely. So we have put, I think it's like 4 pages. It is a comprehensive prep checklist. So if you are going to get interviewed on podcasts and you're like, okay, I've got all these great tips from this interview, but how do I prepare? What do I do before, during, and after the interview? We've put all of our top tips in a prep checklist. And so we're going to put the link to that in the episode description in the show notes, but it's a 4 page interview podcast prep checklist and it's
Love it.
beautifully designed. You can literally print it out and give yourself a little check, check, check whenever you do a podcast interview. So you are set up for success.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And if someone's listening and they're like, I need me some Jessica, where can people find you online? Where should people go to hang out with you or find out more?
Well, come hang out with me on LinkedIn. So Jessica Rhodes, Rhodes. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. Add a note. Tell me you heard me on the podcast here so we can just connect. And I'm also, I run our Instagram at Interview Connection. So whether you're on Instagram or LinkedIn, you can find me there. I'm always around.
I love it. I love it. All right, you guys, we are going to have those links underneath this video if you're watching on YouTube or in the show notes if you're listening in. Jessica, thank you so much for spending some time with the girlfriends and opening some doors to some serious podcast goodness.
Thank you for having me.